Hi, it's Rob from Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint a 30k Space Wolf. If you'd like to support the channel, my Ko-fi and Patreon pages are linked below. Now on to the video. So this is the miniature that we're going to be painting on this tutorial. It's one of the new Mark 6 miniatures. It's had the head replaced and one shoulder pad replaced. So you have the gold trim and some details on there. First colour that we're going to use is Vallejo Black. It's going to be to do all the seals on the armour between those pieces of battle plate. Going to do the body, like the casing of the bolter, and also the sides of that blade section, and the tubing going across the chest too. I'm also going to use black for the top of the power pack as well, where you've got those ridges. I'm just going to do those black and highlight those with grey, because the silver will probably blend in a little bit too much if you have too much silver with the grey. Next up, we're going to use a tiny little bit of Citadel Bugman's Glow. I'm going to use this to paint the face, so just give that a good coat of that. We can move on to the next colour. Now we're going to use some Citadel Baneblade Brown. This is going to be to do the hair and his beard. But mainly if you're just using the beaky heads, we're going to be using this to do the holster and belt and any pouches too. Now we're going to use some Citadel Khorne Red to paint up his mouth and also the Space Wolf Legion icon on his shoulder pad there. Now this is one of the 40k shoulder pads from the Space Wolves, which I've added on because I thought it'd add a little bit of gold to it. But if you are freehanding those icons on, I'll link up how to paint the Space Wolves chapter badge up here. So now I'm going to use some Citadel Iron Hand Steel, and this is going to be to do the grenades, the parts of the bolter like the muzzle and the back parts, the working parts. You've got the magazine, you've got the little bits on that chain blade there, or if you're using the bayonet you'd have to paint that too. Also going to use sections on the power pack and also those big kind of rivety nodule things on the shoulder pad too. I'm going to use a tiny little bit of Citadel Retributor Armor. I'm going to use this to do the trim of the shoulder pad there. I know the Mark 6 ones don't tend to have any kind of border to the shoulder pads, but I thought, you know, add a little bit of gold to it. I've got loads of those shoulder pads from the 40k Space Wolves left over, so you'll probably be seeing more of these 40k shoulder pads appearing on there. Now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Mephiston Red, and this is mainly for the shoulder pad decorations from the 40k shoulder pad. So if you're not using any of these, or you don't have any of these red decorations on, you don't really need to worry about using Mephiston Red. Starting with the shades now, we're going to use Citadel Druchii Violet. I'm going to use this to do his mouth and also that Mephiston Red diamond on his shoulder. I'm now going to use Citadel Contrast Gore-Grunter Fur and just do this over his hair. It's a nice easy kind of way to shade the hair, get some details on so you don't need to do too many layers to highlight. If you're using kind of Mournfang brown colour to do the similar kind of brown, you could shade with a Grax and then re-highlight with Mournfang, adding little bits of Rakarth flesh to it. Now I'm going to shade the Khorne Red with some Citadel Carroburg Crimson. Next up we're going to use some Citadel Reichland Flesh Shade and put that over his face just to get some of the details on there. I'm going to use some Citadel Agrax Earthshade to do the gold and tone that down and darken that down. Now for a little bit of snakebite leather contrast from Citadel. I'm going to use this to do on the Baneblade Brown pouches and the holster and the belt. The final bit of shading we're going to do is use Citadel Nuln Oil on all the Mechanicus standard grey, which is the colour that he's been primed with, and also on all of the Iron Hand steel too. So give that a nice coat of Nuln Oil and we can start recolouring. Going to start working on a face now, so we're going to use Citadel Bugman's Glow as the initial colour again and reapply some of the colour back to the skin. So I'm going to try and leave the shade in the recesses there and try and pick out any of the details. So I'm using a really small brush here. I think it is the Army Painter Insane Detail brush. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Kislev Flesh and mix that with the Bugman's Glow just to lighten that up. We're now going to start picking out the areas to highlight. So if you think about the light coming down from the top, you want to be highlighting those top surfaces to get the extra light areas of paint on there. We're going to do the same again, mixing a little bit more Kislev Flesh with the previous mix just to lighten that up, and then we are going to add these highlights to the very top surfaces, kind of like edge highlight, bit of a wobbling camera there. And this is using the Army Painter Psycho brush, which is really thin and a bit of a pain sometimes, but handy for doing stuff like this. You can pick out the details really easily, like so. Get those creases by the eyes and the wrinkles on the brow, like so. Now we are going to use a little bit of Vallejo white. I'm going to use this to do his eyes and also his teeth. So using the Psycho again, we are going to do the brush from the nose outwards so that you can trace that across the eyeball quite well. Find it easier than just trying to blob it in there where you might get a little round blob of paint. If you're dragging the brush from the point, you can get those eyes straight across. Although looking at that, I've not done too well on that left hand one. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Vallejo Black to do a little spot in each eye. So I'm trying to put the spot at the top of each eye so he's like kind of looking from under his brow a bit more. And then you can tidy up the underside of the eyes if they're not quite to your liking, using a little bit of Bugman's Glow and then a bit of Reikland Flesh Shade, and that will just tone those down and get those looking a little bit better. As you can see here, I've botched up that right eye quite nicely, so we're going to start that again. So just work your way through the eyes, using black and white and getting them to how you want them. Now I'm going to start working on the armour using Citadel Mechanicus Standard Grey. So you're thinking about the light again, if it's coming down from above, you want the Mechanicus Standard Grey to mainly be on the top edges of stuff. You wouldn't have it on the underside of like the arms and the legs. And the further down the shoulder it get, the less light would probably be on it. You'd probably get a little bit of shade underneath each of those kind of bolt things on the shoulder too. There's plenty of details on the armour as well, which would shadow the grey or allow it to get more light. So for the next highlight, we're going to use Citadel Dawnstone. We're going to do about 50% of the area we did with Mechanicus Standard Grey with this one now, so the areas nearer the light source would be getting the most light, so they would be lighter. So turn the brightness up a little bit so you can see where this layer is going a bit better. This is Citadel Administratum Grey. So we're going to use this mainly to do edge highlights, and on the areas where you've got that Dawnstone highlight and there's quite a big area of it, you can use a little bit of Administratum Grey just to highlight those areas too. So like the tops of the shoulder pads, maybe little bits on the top of the hand there or the top of the arm, a little bit on the top of the thigh, that kind of thing. The armour plate done, we're now going to work on the gold, so we're going to go back to Citadel Retributor Armor. Much like you did with the Mechanicus Standard Grey, you're going to paint this on the areas that would be catching the most light and leaving the areas that would be getting no light shaded. Now we're going to highlight the gold using Citadel Liberator Gold. So you want to do about 50% of the area that you've just done with the Retributor Armor. As before, thinking about where the light's catching it, you want to do it on the top edges and the areas that will be catching more light. Finally, for the gold, we're going to add a little bit of Model Air Chrome from Vallejo to the Liberator Gold. We're just going to do some edge highlights and also some highlights at the very top of the areas where the gold is the lightest, and this will give it a nice crisp edge and also some really bright shine on the areas that will be catching the most light. I'm now going to use a little bit of Iron Hand Steel from Citadel just to touch up some of those silvery metallic areas, just to add a little bit of shine back to them. Don't want to do too much, you want to leave quite a bit of the shade on there. Depending on how grubby you want them, you might want to use a little bit of a Grax Earth shade on those metallic parts as well, just to give them a little bit of a grimy look. But we're just going to add some Iron Hand Steel to bring the colour back to those. Also going to do some edge highlights on these trim sections, on the cable-y kind of bits on the chest too, using a little bit of this. Next up, I'm going to use a tiny little spot of Vallejo Model Air Chrome and just add a little tiny blob of that to each of the metallic bits. You can see there that I've nicely spread that Model Air Chrome across the shoulder, so I'm going to touch that up in a moment with a bit of Mechanicus Standard Grey and then some Nuln Oil, so it doesn't have that nice shiny area on that shoulder pad anymore. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Khorne Red and highlight or reapply the colour to the Legion icon on the pauldron here. So be careful not to obliterate the eye and the little details on the snoz there. You just want to get most of the colour back on there, leave some of the Carroburg crimson in those recesses. I'm now going to use some Citadel Wazdakka Red and just highlight kind of the top half of that icon. We're also going to now highlight the edges of it with Citadel Pink Horror. So thinking about the light coming from above, you're just going to be highlighting the top edges of it. You don't want to have the highlights going all the way around. Working on the gems now, we're going to go to Citadel Mephiston Red. Slightly further away than it should have been. But basically I do these in opposites, so I'm doing the top of the top right triangle with Mephiston Red and the bottom of the bottom left triangle, and then the top of the tip of the top left part and the tip of the bottom right part with the Mephiston Red. Then we're going to highlight that with Evil Sunz Scarlet, doing 50% of the previous colour, and a little tiny bit of Wild Rider Red just to do some really small highlights on those areas. If you want me to do one of these shaped gems, let me know in the comments and I'll get one of those up, because it's slightly too far away for my liking. Now I'm going to add a tiny little spot of Vallejo white just to do some edging and spots of light. So we're going to put the spots of light in the darker areas, and then we're going to use it on the very edges of those to make it appear that light is reflecting off it. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Balor Brown. I'm going to start applying some chafes and scrapes to the holster and the pouches. So you're doing horizontal brushstrokes on the vertical sections, vertical brushstrokes on the horizontal sections, basically 90 degrees to whichever edge that you are highlighting. And you just want to be doing rough and ready strokes so you get that imperfect line. You don't just have a straight line going down the edge to highlight it, you've got that rough scraped look to it. I'm now going to use a little bit of Citadel Rakar Flesh, mix that with the Balor Brown. I'm going to use this to highlight those scrapes. So again, you're doing the brush strokes about 90 degrees to the part that you are highlighting. You're not highlighting all of those scrapes, just a few little bits to make them stand out. So it looks like it's got different levels of scuffs around the holster. Now we're going to go over all of the sections in black using Vallejo Black. I'm also going to paint these back parts as mentioned earlier. Get those blocked off with the black. Now we can come back with German grey and start the highlights. Now we're going to use some Vallejo German grey, and highlighting in the way we've been highlighting everything else, you're going to be using this to do the top areas on the sections of black that you've applied, and then doing about 50% of the sides where you've got that casing on the bolter and the chain blade at the front there. Basically doing the ridges in the seals too, and on those sections of the power pack you want to do about 50 or 60% of them from the top. The final highlight to the black area is going to be Mechanicus Standard Grey. We're just going to use this as an edge highlight, so all the edges that will be catching light, you want to be highlighting those with this, just a nice thin line there to show those details up. I'm going to use some Citadel Balor Brown. I'm going to start highlighting the hair, trying to keep it to the ridges on the hairs that have been moulded onto the miniature. Now I'm going to mix a little bit of Rakar Flesh and do a little highlight on each of those little ridges of hair, just to make them stand out a little bit more. I'm going to do a little bit of Citadel Khorne Red and use this to do some small rune shapes on the armour plate. I'm going to do a couple on the shoulder here, one on this side, one on the other side, one on the other pauldron. But you can add these pretty much anywhere you want on the miniature. They've got plenty of surface area to do some nice runes on there. If you'd like a little video on painting up the runes as well, sing out and I'll get one of those done. The final layer I'm going to do is Citadel Retributor Armor, and this is just going to be to do a little bit of one of those kind of Nordic type patterns that you find on things. Just a little bit of a crossing over gold pattern, and then I'm going to do some blocks of gold in the middle, like 2 half blocks in the top space and the bottom space too, just to fill in those gaps. So this is the finished Space Wolf. Really happy with how he turned out. Looking forward to getting the rest of the miniatures done, so I can have a small Space Wolf force done in the same colours. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also think about subscribing to some of our other social media, linked below. Thanks very much. If you like the channel, you enjoy the content and you'd like to support me, my Ko-fi and Patreon pages are linked below. Thanks very much.